everyone. Welcome to Lost in the Stacks. It is March. Wait, no, it's April, but we're talking about the books I read in March. And I'm very excited because I had a really good reading month. February was not really a great reading month, which is why I did not make a video because I did not want to talk about that. I DNF'd a couple books. The best thing that happened was I read the Caravel trilogy, finally. It was really great, but we're going to talk about that more later because I read Once Upon a Broken Heart this month. So we'll talk about all of that later. But I actually made a overview of the books I read. So yeah, I read 13 books total, which is the most books I've read per month so far because in January I read 12. Last month I think I read 6 or 7. So we're up in those totals, which I like. 13 books total, 5 ebooks, 8 physical. I read 3 advanced copies of books, and then out of the books that were not advanced copies, I read 6 from the library. I think 2 of those were from Libby, and the rest were I borrowed from the physical library. I borrowed 1 from a friend, and then 3 of them are books that I own that were in my lovely TBR that is currently overflowing. So I need to read more books that are from here rather than from the library in April. Hopefully, we'll see what happens. But yeah, that's my overview. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to change up what I did from January. I'm going to start by talking about the advanced copies of books that I read, and then I'm going to go from my lowest rated books to my highest rated books and end with my number 1 book of the month, which I'm very excited to talk about. So let's get into it. Okay, so as I said, I read 3 advanced copies of books this month, or in March. We have 1 book that I rated 2 stars and 2 books that I rated 5 stars. This is a big difference. So I think I want to start with my 2-star book, which is The Red Pirate by S.K. Minnis. So I found this on NetGalley because I was just looking for books to read, and I was like, oh, I love pirates. Like, Pirates of the Caribbean is one of my favorite, series of movies. I've always loved since I was a little girl, reading about pirates and studying pirates, and it's always been fascinating to me. And so I was like, oh, I'll read this. This will be great, right? There were no reviews for it, and I gave it 2 stars. I like the idea. I like the idea behind the story. The characters were well done, but the execution of the story was not great. The writing was kind of mid. This is meant to be a historical fiction novel, yet the girl has an electric stove in her house in the first chapter. And as a history buff, that bothers me. So that set me off from the very beginning. I was just like, nope, don't like this. But it was a good idea, but poor execution, very poor writing. Some people might like it because it is a good story, but yeah, if you're like me and you expect a high level of writing and execution of the plot, this is not the book for you. It does come out on May 30th, so in 2 months. So if you do want to read it, I'm guessing it'll probably be on Kindle for really cheap. So if you want to try it, give it a go. It's a great story, but yeah, execution-wise, just done really poorly. So I gave it 2 stars. Let's move on. So the next advanced copy of a book I read was We Shall Be Monsters by Tara Sim. And this is a book that's based on Indian mythology. And I did not realize how much I love Indian mythology until I read this book. And I was like, this is so fascinating. This is so cool. And the world, it's not technically historical fiction, but it feels like pre-colonialism India. That's kind of the vibe that it gives, but it is very much steeped in the mythology and like asuras and devas and the afterlife and death. There's a lot of death. It is considered a horror. I would not put it in that. It wasn't actually that scary. I mean, it was intense. Like, there's a girl who can raise people from the dead. It's not actually that scary, at least to me. I would put it in more of like the thriller category, but yeah. So it follows this girl who at the beginning of the book, she wakes up on a funeral pyre next to her sister. She died. She came back to life. Her sister is also dead, but did not come back to life. And the whole story is her going on this journey trying to figure out how to bring her sister back to life. And she gets swept up into all this political intrigue and war and all of this great things. And all she wants is just to bring her sister back. And it is so heartwarming. And I think I cried. I'm pretty sure I cried a couple times in this book. And there's like a little bit of romance, but it's not like the main part of the book, but it does add to it in a very tasteful way. The writing is spectacular. I need the second book because it's the first part of a duology. I need the second book. The author is not releasing it until next year. So I have to wait very impatiently for the second book. But I loved it. Gave it 5 stars. This book comes out on June 25th. So I highly recommend you get it. I already put it on my Amazon wish list because I want a physical copy of this book so badly. So yeah, that is We Shall Be Monsters by Tara Sim. I was really in a like dark fantasy kind of mood this month, apparently based on my reading. So one of the books that I read that I was so happy to get an advance copy of was Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews. I have never read any of their writing before, but I have followed their Instagram for a while. I like the way they do their videos and they don't show their face or anything, and it's like ambiguous and like there's like all these like foresty things. Like the way they do their Instagram videos is just genius and I love it. But this book was perfection. Listen, okay, it is, again, young adult horror, just like We Shall Be Monsters, but this is actually horror. Like, this is genuine horror. Like, I was on the edge of my seat being like, don't die! Like, anyways, it follows these 2 guys. I think they're like juniors or seniors in high school, and they go to this boarding school. They're best friends. They show up at the beginning of the semester and things are just weird. There's just weird things going on, and like the main character, he just is like, what the heck, I don't understand what's going on. And come to find out, and this is not spoiling anything because this is in like the descriptions online. Come to find out, he and his best friend, they write a lot of he writes dark stories. His friend draws those monsters and characters in his stories. Those monsters have come to life. And it creates this whole chaotic mess that they have to solve. And the ending, I was like, I love the ending, but I also hated the ending. And you'll understand if you read the book why I say that. But like the relationship between the 2 main characters is so beautiful and sweet. And like the main character, he doesn't say he's asexual, but like he's like struggling with like these emotions of being like, I'm like attracted to this person, but also at the same time like I'm not interested in any sort of like physical relationship or anything. I just want to love them. And like it is a great representation of, at least what I've heard from other people, what that feels like what being asexual feels like. And I think that C.G. Drews did a really good job of explaining that and showing that. And I think that added a lot to the book because it makes the main character not necessarily relatable, but definitely more lovable, because you see him suffering and struggling and not really knowing what to do with himself. And you're just like, oh, I struggle. I don't know what to do with myself with certain things in my life and the way I am. And then you're just like, you relate to him. And I love that. I love that so much. And also, I don't know if C.G. Drews meant this, but I would definitely put the main character as autistic coded. The kid's too awkward to not be autistic. I related to him too hard for him not to be autistic. So I just love this book so much, and I have spent almost 4 minutes talking about it according to my camera. So yeah, that is Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews. It comes out on October 29th, which I feel like is perfect for this book, right before Halloween. But yeah, it's spooky, it's sweet, it's just, it's so good. It's so good. Yeah. Okay, so those are the advanced copies of books that I read. Now we're gonna get into the physical books that I read, or like not advanced copies of books, because some of these are ebooks. But let's start with my 3-star books. I have 2 3-star books from this month. First of all is The Darkest Part of the Forest by Holly Black, which, as I said, I was into dark fantasy this month. I liked this book. I thought it was a great story. Like, the plot was written well, the characters were pretty good, but like, it was just kind of mid. I feel like that's the best way to describe it. Like, it follows this girl who lives in this town that is surrounded by the Fae and kind of ruled by the Fae in a sense. Like, they're controlled by the Fae to a certain extent. Like, they're always in danger from them. And in this town, there is this glass coffin that holds this Fae boy, and he's been there for as long as anyone can remember. But then one day, he wakes up. And then this girl's trying to find him, help him, and there's just this whole, like, mess that happens, and it's just kind of like teen angst. Very teen angst. Just very kind of weird, but, like, not in a good way. Like, I read this because I want to read the Cruel Prince series, and this is Holly Black, and I was like, I want to see if I like Holly Black before I invest in those books. And I definitely say I will read The Cruel Prince, but I probably will not buy it. I'm probably going to actually take this book to Mr. K's, which is a resale bookstore in the area, just to, you know, I feel like it shouldn't stay on my shelf. I'm sure someone else will love it more than I did. So yeah, The Darkest Part of the Forest, 3 stars. It was pretty good, but not good enough to stay on my bookshelf. The second 3-star book I read, and a lot of people are going to be upset at me about this probably, was Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I have been waiting on this book to come in on my Libby for months, since last year. And I was very excited for it because everyone loves Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows, and I was just like, yay. And I've never read a truly, like, romantasy, like, story other than maybe Once Upon a Broken Heart, if you can count that as romantasy. I don't really count that as romantasy, but that's just my opinion. So this is my, like, real, like, romance fantasy story, and it just wasn't for me. It felt very Hallmarky at points, and I hate Hallmark movies. The actual plot was great. I loved the idea of 2 rival newspaper writers, like, going at each other and then falling in love through war. Like, I love that idea. But here's the thing. I realize this is actually one thing that I really don't like about things like Hallmark and some romantasy books. The romance drove the plot and the world. It felt like the person decided, I want these two characters to get together, so I'm going to write the plot and the world around these two characters, and so that they fall in love. I did not like that. I did not like it being romance driven. Like, I thought the romance was great and all, but I wanted more of the plot. I wanted more of, like, what's going on with this war with the gods and all of this. Like, it was just not great. So I gave it 3 stars because I did enjoy it. It's just not something that I'll ever read again, and I don't know if I'll read Ruthless Vows. Maybe. But we'll see. It's probably gonna be a while if I do read it because I don't really have the motivation to. I don't really care. So please don't come at me, Book Talk and Bookstagram, because we have different opinions. I did not like this book, but that's okay. Okay, so let's jump into my 4-star reads. I have 2 4-star reads. The first one is The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. I have had this book on my shelf for a few months now, and I was kind of scared to read it because I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna like this. I'm not sure. It's a dark fantasy, but like it's kind of weird. It was really good. Listen, Melissa Albert knows how to write a story. It's basically about this girl who, her grandmother wrote this like really obscure but also really popular book called The Tales of the Hinterland. And her grandma dies, and then her mom gets taken away, kidnapped or something, and so she goes on this journey to find her grandma, who she's never met, and like where her grandma lived, and gets swept up into this alternate reality world, and it's very good. And there are a lot of twists and turns that you will not be expecting, and I loved it. I gave it 4 stars. I don't remember why I didn't quite give it 5 stars. I don't know if it's just because I didn't fully get into the first half. The first half was kind of slow, so maybe that's why. But yeah, it was really good. I don't know if I want to read the second book in this series. Like, it's a duology. I don't know if I want to read the second book because the first book, I felt really wrapped it up well at the end. There wasn't like a cliffhanger or anything. So I don't think I'm going to read the second book just because I was happy with the ending and I feel like I don't need any more. So yeah, that's The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. The second 4-star book that I have is The House of Hades by Rick Riordan. I am finally almost done with the Heroes of Olympus series. I have 1 more book left, The Blood of Olympus. Hopefully I will finish that in April. Hopefully. It's a little bit shorter than House of Hades, so I think it'll be a little bit easier. I had a hard time getting into this book. Like, the first 100 pages felt really slow, and I don't know why that is. Because technically I started this book in February, but I had such a hard time getting into it. Like, I could not get into it. And then finally, like, the end of the month, I was just like, I got far enough that I was like, oh, I'm actually interested in this now. So I like really started reading. Leo is really annoying in this book. Actually, most of the guys are just kind of really annoying in this book, except for Percy, obviously. And that kind of threw me off. But it was really good, and I'm excited to finish this series out. I haven't enjoyed the second Percy Jackson series quite as much as the first, but it is good. I probably won't read it again, but it is good, and I'm excited to say that I finished it once I finished The Blood of Olympus. So I actually had 4 5-star books, and you might be asking, Christy, how do you read so many 5-star books? Like, do you just not have a good rating system? No, I have a great rating system. I can't explain it to you because I'm autistic and the brain does not say words in English. But I have a great rating system. And I'm just really good at picking books that I enjoy based on just the summary. I'm very good at knowing what books I think I'll like, and So I usually pick up books that are going to be 4 or 5 star reads for me. I don't see the point in wasting my time on something that's less than that. The occasional 3-star read is fine, but like less than that, I'm just like, no. Before I get too far into talking about my rating system, let's talk about the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy. Okay, so I read these books in September of last year. I adored them. I loved them. I could not put them down. They were amazing. I fell in love with Evangeline and Jax. Okay, Jax is like my first like real fictional crush. Because he's amazing. He's just, I love this man. Like, he's horrible at the beginning, but his character arc makes him amazing. So, I love these books. And then I read Caraval last month. I had not read them before. And I realized I wish I had read Caraval before I read the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy. Because I heard people say, like, it doesn't matter what order you read them in, it's fine. It's not fine. If you want to read Stephanie Garber's books, read Caraval, and then read Once Upon a Broken Heart. Yes, they don't have a lot of ties in, but Jax is a common character between both of them, and just reading Caraval will give you a good idea of the world as a whole and help you better understand what's going on in Once Upon a Broken Heart. Once Upon a Broken Heart follows Evangeline, who is a girl who her boyfriend falls for her stepsister, and she's like, there must be a curse placed upon him or something for him to turn his back on me and love her. So she goes to this fate, who are like these mischievous, like immortal creatures, like people in this world, and she goes to Jax, the broken, is it the Fate of Broken Hearts or something like that? I don't remember. I've read the series twice and I don't remember, because I just know him as Jax. And she goes to him and she's like, please stop him from marrying her, and Jax is like, okay, I'll do that, and turns them all to stone. And yeah, so that sets off a wonderful chain of events where Evangeline ends up marrying a prince, and there's all this other stuff that goes on, and like curses and love and true love, and like it's just a great, it'll throw you for a loop. That's all I'll say. It will take you for a wild ride. You will not be able to put it down. It is so good. There is romance, but I would not say this is a romantasy, because when I think of romantasy, I think of something like Divine Rivals, where romance is the main thing. Evangeline's romances, because she's in a little bit of a love triangle situation for a while, it's not the main thing. Like, the plot is the main thing. Evangeline, she is the main character. It's all about her. Like, these guys, they're just side characters. Like, they're great, but they're side characters. And I love it. I'm here for it. It's such a great series. Caraval was too. I rated that 4 stars. Once Upon a Broken Heart, Stephanie Garber definitely upped her game. 5 stars all the way through. So after I read The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert, I found out that the Tales from the Hinterland, which is the main character's grandma writes those stories, I found out that there is actually a book called The Tales of the Hinterland, and it is the stories from the book that was written. Like, it's there, and I was just like, this exists? I must read this, because in The Hazelwood, you don't find out what any, like, you get tidbits, but you don't really find out what the stories are. I think there's like one whole story from I think there's like 16 different stories in this book, in the Tales from the Hinterland. So I got it, read it, loved it, rated it 5 stars. These are kind of creepy stories. Again, we're going back to that dark fantasy. They are really creepy, and a lot of them have sad endings. So I cried a few times, but they're just like fairy tales. I love fairy tales. Felt like Hans Christian Andersen kind of fairy tales. So if you like fairy tales, you don't need to read The Hazelwood. just read this and you'll be happy. That's all I'm saying. Okay, so next I read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson, which is a big popular book, and I love like true crime stuff. Only Murders in the Building is one of my favorite shows. I don't really like season 3, but season 1 and 2 are great. I love true crime. I love stuff like that. So I was very fascinated by this book. I was not sure if I would love it though, because I've been in more of a fantasy rather than a mystery mood. But yeah, I fell in love within the first chapter. This story follows a girl who, she lives in this town and she's working on her like final project for senior year, and she decides, I want to prove that this person did not murder this other person 5 years ago. I want to prove this person's innocence. And it takes her on a wild ride, and it's kind of scary at times. Like it's like, is she going to die? Is she going to be okay? Like, she gets into so many situations where you're just like, are you normal? Or are you like, do you have a death wish or something? Like, so I was screaming at the main character like half of the book, just because she was making so many stupid decisions. But her stupid decisions end up making things work out in the end. But it was such a good book. I loved it so much. I immediately got the next 2 books in the trilogy that it is. So the second book, Good Girl, Bad Blood, has to do when she's a freshman at college. So that's going to be interesting. I actually just started that yesterday, or maybe it was Thursday. I haven't gotten very far yet, but I just started that, and I am very excited to read the next 2 books. Because it's really good, and I love true crime, and this is just, it's perfect. Not perfection, just perfect. Okay, so let's talk about my number 1 book of the month. So this is Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I always pick authors that have harder to pronounce names, and I'm like, I hope I'm pronouncing this right. But yeah, so Kaikeyi is about this girl who lived in pre-colonialism India, and it is actually a retelling of an Indian mythology. And I've never read the original, but like, I don't really care. I like this, and I don't want to ruin it. Because Kaikeyi is she is the villain in the original story. So I like her as not a villain, so I don't really want to ruin that. But anyways, she is married to this, I think they use the term Raja. I think. Don't quote me on that. She is married to this king, and she's his 3rd wife, but she is what they call God's touched, which basically means, it can mean a lot of things, but for her, it means she has the ability to enter this thing called the binding plane, which she can see her bonds between souls, between her soul and other people's souls. And she's able to use that to influence people and strengthen her bonds with other people, but also break bonds with people. And it is a very fascinating story. And like, I had never heard of the binding plane before. I found it so fascinating, that specifically, and how she used it and misused it in a lot of ways as well. And just the story of this woman who lives in this world where women can only fit into a certain mold, and she works to break that mold, and she works to create rights for women. She's a feminist, and she's wanting women to be able to sell in the marketplace, to do this and to do that, and not need their husbands to do everything and anything. Trying to make a world better for women. And I love that. I thought that was great, and it was such a good book. I love Kaikeyi, and I love this book so much that when I found out that Vaishnavi is writing a new book, or she wrote a new book, it's called The Goddess of the River. then I found it on NetGalley and got it, and I'm currently in the middle of reading that, and it is just as good. And it's about the goddess Ganga, and it's just, I'm loving it so much. I've already cried, and I'm only 25% through the book. So she's just a great writer, and I'm very excited to talk about that book next month when I do a reading wrap up. But that is my final book, my number one book. But I had a great reading month, and I loved all of these books except for The Red Pirate. And I am excited for this month because I have a lot of great books that I'm trying to read. The Blood of Olympus is one of them. I'm gonna finish reading a Good Girl's Guide to Murder series. I want to read Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies hopefully this month. I want to get to more of these specifically. So we'll see what happens. Yeah, so thanks for joining me for this reading wrap up. I hope that you enjoyed listening to me talk, and maybe you found a couple more books to add to your Goodreads list. Yeah, follow me here. Please subscribe. Also follow me on Instagram. It's also Lost in the Stacks. So yeah, thanks for joining me. Bye.